brought to you in part by Stardust. Download the app and start sharing your reactions to movies, trailers, and TV shows today. Follow Jaby Koay first and tag us in your first video. Hello people, I'm Jaby Koay, joined by ACHARA KIRK.
Hello.
We're going to talk about Star Wars: The Last Jedi. We watched it last night at 9:40 p.m. and this morning at 8:40 a.m. twice in less than 12 hours, and now we're going to talk about it. As per usual, we'll give you a very short summation as to our feelings about the film, and then we'll go more in depth about all the feelings. First and foremost, let's give you the one-liner from IMDb just to give you a little bit of context in case you know absolutely nothing, in case you've never seen a trailer, in case you've never heard of Star Wars. Rey develops her newly discovered abilities with the guidance of Luke Skywalker, who is unsettled by the strength of her powers. Meanwhile, the Resistance prepares to do battle with the First Order. If you've never seen a Star Wars film, you're gonna be a little bit lost here, even though I feel like the movie is very self-contained, like you get it for the most part. If you've never watched Force Awakens, if you've never watched any other Star Wars movies, I don't think you'll be super lost, but you won't be able to fully appreciate what's going on here. So if you're brand new to Star Wars, which is highly unlikely if you're watching this, I don't recommend starting off with The Last Jedi. I recommend going and watching at least Force Awakens and then coming to this. Don't worry about the prequels. I want to say right off the bat that I really like this movie. I gave it 5 out of 5 on Stardust. I actually genuinely came out of the theater completely elated. There's a lot of fans out there it's very divisive. On Rotten Tomatoes, I checked, it was something like 50% of audiences didn't like it.
Yeah, but it received a very high critic score.
Exactly. I'm in the camp that really enjoys the film, that really appreciates what Rian Johnson did with it.
All in all, it worked for me. The only one thing, if I had to nitpick, was I just wish it felt a little bit shorter. In my initial viewing, I thought it felt a little long.
I would agree with you that there were parts where it felt like it lingered a little bit. Having watched it twice, I think that everything that was in there was justified. They managed to set up and pay off everything, and you don't know that on initial viewing, that everything that is introduced to you will be paid off. So there are moments where you're like, why are we doing this? Why are we here? Then it comes back around and you're like, oh, that's why we're here.
Yeah.
Okay, I get it. If you haven't seen this yet and you're wondering whether or not you should watch it, you'd want to watch at least Force Awakens and then this in order to appreciate it, and I think that you'll have a good time. Before we get deep into it, let's talk a little bit about Stardust. If you haven't heard yet, Stardust is an application you can download for your phone. It allows you to record reviews between 3 and 30 seconds long for movies, trailers, and TV shows.
You can also follow other people. It's basically like a social media network for people who love entertainment.
If you enjoy things like Twitter, where you can have basically a conversation about a very specific topic, this is an app that just solely focuses on movies, entertainment. This is an app for anyone who loves film, anyone who loves TV, because it just allows you to stay in that conversation and hear a vast swath of opinions from different people who are film fans like yourself.
It's so easy as well if you're thinking about watching a movie, for example, Star Wars: The Last Jedi. You could just click on all the reactions that everyone's posted on the app for Star Wars.
Here's a few, for example.
The movie is fantastic. Rian Johnson did a great job. I hope he does the next one too, even though I'm a huge JJ fan. I think Ryan take this to a next level. The cast was fantastic. Most of the questions from the first part were addressed in this one. There were a lot of laughs, which was a pleasant surprise.
I loved it. I was locked in the entire time. There were no slow moments for me in this movie. The battle sequences are sick. I love Adam Driver as Kylo Ren. I think he plays the perfect damaged villain.
This was amazing. So much that I wanted to happen, happened, and I have so much more to think about over the next 2 years. It's crazy.
So hopefully that's inspired you. Please download Stardust using the link in the description below. Make sure to follow us first, as we recommended it to you, and after you upload your first video, whatever that might be, tag both myself and ACHARA on Twitter so we have a better chance of seeing it and including your video in our next video. Let's keep this spoiler-free still for the time being as much as possible. That being said, inherent to talking about the movie, some things might be given away a little bit. Nothing major. Let's talk about this relative to the last Star Wars film. Force Awakens was very exciting because it was the first Star Wars film in a very long time, and Episode 7 was something that we all thought was never coming. For those of us who loved Star Wars, who just anxiously wanted more of Star Wars, it was immeasurably exciting to see Force Awakens coming to life, coming to fruition. No matter what, that movie was gonna sell out and make $1 billion. When I watched The Force Awakens, I was a little bit underwhelmed. I liked it, I appreciated it, but I knew right away there's a lot of happiness around this film just because it wasn't awful. But I know in about a year or two, people are gonna look back and go, yeah, that was all right. I think that The Last Jedi is gonna be a film that stands the test of time. When people look at The Last Jedi 10, 20 years from now, they'll be like, wow, that was so much better than The Force Awakens. I mean, that's how I feel right now. I didn't connect with the people in Rogue One, and Force Awakens was just like, it was a rehashing of all the old Star Wars films.
Yeah.
Last Jedi was its own thing. It gave you homage to other Star Wars films without it being just an homage for the sake of being an homage at the service of the story.
I'll be honest, I'm not like the biggest Star Wars fangirl. I love the franchise. I think it's great. I enjoy watching it. On its own as a movie, it was really great. It hit all the right notes. I loved the characters. I loved the relationships. And I loved the comedic moments and also the action and adventure and drama, everything. It was just really fun.
Characters that were introduced in the previous installment were enhanced in this installment, in my opinion, because you got experience with Rey and Finn and Poe, but it was like they were just introduced.
Yeah.
Not a whole lot was done with them to hook you into them. I didn't really care about any of them at the end of Force Awakens. It was fun, don't get me wrong. I had a good time, but I didn't care. There wasn't like, other than Han Solo, there was no Han Solo replacement for me. Like no one in there was a character that I was thinking about after the movie was over, except for BB-8. No one in the movie would stand out to me. But here, like Poe was so interesting. Like
Yeah.
he was a cool character. Even Leia was so much better here than she was in the first one. I thought she was fantastic. Rey she was more of Rey. Kylo Ren is
was
so much better.
awesome, yeah.
So much better. The way they're carrying these characters into a continuation of their journey was actually solid. If I were to rank this, I think for me it would be Empire and then Last Jedi. New Hope maybe is in between those two. I have to let this sit with me for a little while longer before I like finalize that ranking, and maybe a year before I decide how I truly feel, because
Right.
it's still fresh.
Yeah.
I'm still fresh on this high from Last Jedi. There were 3 simultaneous stories in this. I'm not going to tell you exactly what, but there were some people I saw online that took issue with there being 3 different stories. And they're like, oh, it's all over the place. I can't keep up with it. It's doing too much.
I didn't feel that way.
I did not feel that way either. There were parts in the first viewing where it felt like it lingered a bit. Watching it a second time, I'm like, it didn't feel like it lingered so much.
Yeah.
Still could have been shortened a little bit, but it lingering didn't feel as strong because I knew where it was going. As a story, I thought it was actually solid. Everything they set up had a payoff. Characters had arcs. Even if Mark Hamill disagrees with his character arc, he had actually a very strong arc in the story. I thought this was a better story overall than Force Awakens. It actually exists by itself really, really well, and as part of the other films in the anthology. This film actually does make sense of things in a strong way that I wasn't expecting. They did answer a lot of questions. Maybe not the answers you're looking for, but you got answers, and I think that they were bold answers. Everybody all around, like kind of like what you said earlier, everybody did an A+ job.
Yeah,
pretty much.
everybody brought it.
The only thing that bothered me was a few moments, but I don't think that was the actor's faults. I think that was a script thing, and I'll talk about that later. The one thing that did bother me, and I don't know if it has to do with her performance, but Rey looked like this through a lot of the film. Like she had done a million shoulder shrugs leading up to principal photography.
I don't think that was an acting thing. I
No,
think she just done a lot more training for the role this time round, and I think she just like bulked up a bit maybe.
There was nothing about Rey's performance that I went home with. Let's put it that way. Poe, I went home with. I was like, Poe did a great job.
Yeah.
Right from the beginning, he was awesome. You know who was a standout character for me was Rose. She's the Asian girl who's introduced.
Yes,
What's her name again?
Kelly Marie Tran.
Kelly Marie Tran, who you actually did a short film with.
I did, indeed, yes.
You guys can find that on the internet somewhere. What's it called? Just
Alana Perkins is hot.
Okay, Alana Perkins is hot, if you guys want to watch that. I thought she was a standout character way more than Rey was, and Rey was a main character, and so that kind of threw me a little bit.
I'm surprised you're not talking about Adam Driver as Kylo Ren. I thought he was so great.
He was great.
Yeah.
He was. Adam Driver did a far superior job in this film than he did in the first film. I don't know if that has to do with the script or he just felt more comfortable in the role. Maybe it was a combination of the two. He definitely brought it way more in this film than he did in the first film. I found him a lot more watchable in this movie than in the first film.
There was more to his character in this film. There were more layers and conflict and stuff that he could work with, and he's a really good actor.
Now, the biggest performance of all, which is obvious, which is Mark Hamill, because he had nothing to say in the first film, and I thought that almost everything he did in this movie was perfect. There was 1 or 2 things where I was like, and I couldn't tell if that was him or if that was Rian Johnson having fun. Overall, I think that Mark Hamill was a memorable performance.
Yes.
Like, I go home thinking about Mark Hamill's performance and his lines and whatnot. Benicio del Toro, I forgot to talk about him. He's the performance that I would like, I would talk, we were making fun, we were not making fun, but imitating him when we left the film just because the the little like his
he did it so well though.
Yeah, like his performance, I felt was so much better than what he's doing for Marvel. It was honed in on a very simple set of parameters as to what this character generally does. His stance, his perspective on things with regards to the rest of the Star Wars universe actually makes sense. Like, I don't agree with him, but I get why he feels the way he does.
Yeah.
I get why he behaves the way he does. And what Benicio del Toro brought to it was great. I like what he did. So acting was great all around.
Good job, actors.
It's been clear from like behind the scenes and stuff that Rian Johnson is a devout fan of Star Wars. He approached this like a kid with toys, like toys that he's loved his whole life, has always wanted to play with, and now he finally gets to play with them. It really shows. Like there's a real obvious love for Star Wars in this film. The beautiful thing is, it was all in the service of the story. I said that earlier, and I feel like it's important to state again because it's very easy to get caught up in the fan service and just like nods and winks at the fans. Here he does that, but he still tells a solid story. Whether you agree with the direction of the story, with the direction of the characters, doesn't matter. If you just look at this movie by itself, Rian Johnson did a fantastic job. I think what he did with the camera was amazing. He was making moves here in a way that I feel like if Martin Scorsese was directing it, he may have done the same thing. Like there were great moments with poignant dialogue where the camera pushes in and I'm like, wow.
Yeah.
Like right from the beginning, the camera movement was really interesting. There was a scene in I want to say a busy area. I'm not going to say exactly what because that'll give too much away. The camera's like moving through the crowd. And if you're just an average audience person, you wouldn't appreciate it. But as a director, I'm like, wow, how did he do this? It's just amazing to see him like just cut through the crowds of people until he reaches one of the main characters. This is a film worth studying. He actually did a really good job here. He moves the camera with purpose. And that's what a lot of fancy directors lack. There's directors who do fancy stuff for the sake of being fancy, whereas here, it's all very thought out.
I'm only approaching this as, just a regular lay person. It felt seamless to me, and if I can't see the seams, that's good. Because if I can pick it apart, that means that most people will be able to do that as well. When someone does a good job, you don't notice it. Do you know what I mean? It's like the ballerina who rehearses for thousands of hours and they make it look effortless. But when it's bad, you go, oh God, I notice everything.
You heard it here first. ACHARA KIRK believes Rian Johnson is the master ballerina of movie making.
There was also very good use of silence. You said earlier when we were talking about it that the music was like a character in itself. Every time it was silent, you knew, oh, something important's happening. I have to pay attention. And there was one moment in particular which was like crazy.
Music was a very, very prominent part of this movie. It was almost wall to wall. Clearly, Rian Johnson loves himself some John Williams. Classic Star Wars music was there throughout. It was done in such a way that you don't see movies do anymore. They did a better job here than they did with Force Awakens and Rogue One. The music was just very classic, and it made you feel like you were watching a movie that was made in the 80s or late 70s. It just had that classic familiar feeling that you kind of grew up with. It had a warmness to it that I really appreciated. So yeah, music was great. I think that it's a soundtrack worth buying. Okay. In the original Star Wars trilogy, you had these fights that were quite simple, and they were more about what was going on with the characters. What was their motivation in the scene, what was their feeling, and what were they trying to do? In the prequel trilogy, the fight scenes got away from that, and they were all about fancy schmancy stuff. Really beautiful movement, beautiful gymnastics, acrobatic stuff, but there wasn't really any drive in the characters. There wasn't really any motivation for the characters or the audience for that matter. It's like the fighting was just happening for the sake of fanciness on camera, but you didn't really care. And I was really hoping for a halfway point between the two in this new trilogy. We're not getting that. Clearly, we're not getting any of that. The fight scenes are just following more of the classic tradition of the original trilogy, which is all based on the motivation of the characters. Anytime you see a lightsaber pop out, there is a very clear reason for that. It's like Chekhov's gun. As soon as it's exposed, it needs to be fired. While I appreciate the way the lightsabers are used, while I appreciate the fact that fight scenes are motivated with strong reason and drive, I wish the choreography was just a little bit more fancy. I wish they used stunt doubles sometimes. What was clear to me here is that they didn't use any stunt doubles, if ever. Like, maybe they did and they just disguised it really well, but you can clearly see Adam Driver and Ray fighting, or what's her name?
Daisy Ridley.
Like, you can clearly see them fighting. They needed to make the movements simple enough that these actors, who aren't martial artists, could handle it. That's my opinion anyway. Courtney was remarking how stiff Adam Driver looked, and I'm like, yeah, but he's not a martial artist. As much as he trains, he's got this outfit on, and he's not a martial arts dude. He's an actor. He didn't grow up with this, clearly.
Yeah.
And so they're making the choreography good enough for him. And I wish that they either trained them more in martial arts or use stunt doubles so they could enhance the choreography a little more. Not to the egregious level that the prequels did, but just something like a little Yuen Wu-Ping, a little bit Matrix, a little bit, fancy. Because I think that you just should.
What I did appreciate, though, was that the fighting did look kind of down and dirty. Do you know
Sure.
what I mean?
Yeah, that's true.
Like, it felt realistic. It felt like they were fighting for their lives, and it wasn't always beautiful, even though sometimes that would have been cool because, it's fantasy. But I appreciated that it was just a little bit rough around the edges.
I agree with you. No, I do agree that there is that aspect to it, and that is the argument that some people threw in my face when I was complaining about Force Awakens, that it was a little bit more down and dirty. I do like how they handled that here better than they did in Force Awakens, and I certainly would rather watch these fight scenes than the prequel fight scenes. However, there's still like this hope in my heart that the final installment, or whatever episode 9 is I hope that episode 9 has a little bit more fanciness in their fight scenes without taking away from the story of the fight. That's the thing that was great, is these fight scenes had story. And that's what a lot of fight scenes today lack, is an actual story, an actual drive and motivation to their fight scenes. Like, a lot of times today, there's fight scenes that just happen for the sake of happening, whereas here it was informed by the scene. And that's the best way to have a fight scene, in my opinion. It's enhancing the story that already exists, and it's not the story itself. Again, just to reiterate, I gave this a 5 out of 5.
I gave it a 5 out of 5 as well. I thought it was a solid movie.
There's enough information, I think, that we provided to let you guys decide for yourself if you want to watch it or not. I think that it's a very worthwhile film. If you are a big Star Wars fan in general, you probably have seen it already, but if you haven't, you should definitely watch it before it leaves theaters. So let's move into spoilers. I want to talk about things that I loved, first and foremost.
Okay.
I loved Andy Serkis' performance as Snoke. He was a memorable performance. I forgot to mention him earlier. Andy Serkis is a beast. He does not get the credit he deserves. He has been saying he doesn't get the credit he deserves, and I am inclined to agree with him. Initially, when I heard that, I'm like, whatever, dude. But now I agree with him. I'm like, yeah, you really don't get the credit you deserve. You're doing an awesome job. For a lot of kids, when they're grown-ups, they're gonna talk about these characters they remembered from films as a kid, and they're gonna realize that all of them were played by the same dude. That being said, the way Snoke goes out, I was a little bit unhappy with. It was surprising in a very powerful way, but I was like, oh, I wanted to see him do a little bit more, because they kept kind of amping it up. They kind of kept getting you excited, like Snoke is this really powerful guy, and then he just gets cut in half. I'm like, oh man, like
That was the only way they could have beaten him. He was all like, I see the resolve in Kylo Ren now.
Right, his hubris killed him.
Yeah, it was the resolve to kill him.
You're right, like how would they have done that?
Yeah.
That's the question. I wanted them to explore that, because I'm asking myself, how the hell are they gonna do this?
Yeah.
And I wanted to see how they were gonna do that, but then it was like, it was this quick thing that Adam Driver did, and I'm like, oh, okay, well, there's that. It's over now.
Then there was that epic fight afterwards, which was pretty cool.
Yes, I agree with you. But Force Awakens and this wasn't amping up the Royal Guards. They were amping up Snoke, and I wanted to see what Snoke was gonna do. I wanted just a little bit more with Snoke in terms of action, and I didn't get that. However, that being said, I think Snoke's just presence was amazing. Like,
Yeah.
he was a presence in the film. The Royal Guard fight scene was pretty awesome. Kylo Ren and Rey back-to-back fighting those Royal Guards was pretty amazing. Both audiences that we watched it with, both freaked out when Snoke was killed, and both freaked out when Rey and Kylo Ren were fighting the Royal Guards. There were some really memorable moments when they were fighting. Even though the choreography was alright, it was fun. There were definitely some just cool little tricks that they were doing in the fight. I was like, oh, okay.
And a good use of the Force as well.
So let's talk about Carrie Fisher and Leia Organa. So there was like a psych out death scene for Leia. I thought she was over really quick in the movie, and then it turns out she's got the Force and she's able to live a little bit longer. How she got herself back in the ship only to pass out is a little bit of a plot hole. but I'll just let that one go because I like the movie so much. She was awake enough to get herself in the ship.
I know.
So
She like passed out and then she kind of woke up and was like, oh.
why couldn't you just force awaken herself through the rest of the plot? But it's cool. I thought it was fine. She woke up at the most poignant moment that she could, and that's what counts. It was very effective for the story. Given the kind of uncertainty with what has been shot of Leia for episode 9, I've heard mixed things. Like, I heard that they have shot stuff for her for episode 9 and they just didn't get everything they needed. With this uncertainty in the air, I'm surprised that they didn't keep Luke around for one more installment. While I loved Luke's arc of starting out as this guy who was super cynical and then coming around to being one with the Force again, I thought that was a beautiful arc. Even though Mark Hamill strongly disagrees with where Luke Skywalker starts out, I think that they did a really good job with his character. Even though that's not the Luke you remember from episode 6, it still is a beautiful arc, and it actually makes sense given what they set up in episode 7 and continue to speak of in episode 8. Luke's story actually makes a lot of sense, and it was a bold direction to go because it was very unexpected. It was also a beautiful send-off, even though I wish that Mark Hamill was around for one more installment. It was a beautiful send-off because you have Luke looking off into the double sunset or sunrise, whatever that thing is, which mirrors, it's a call back to episode 4, New Hope, when you see Luke Skywalker look off into the sunrise sunset thing. It was a beautiful close. It was very poetic.
I like that Rey and Kylo Ren had that opportunity to kind of get to know each other better through that
Force speak.
Force telephone.
Yeah.
That whole relationship was just so interesting to me. There's similarities and how drawn they are to each other, and it makes you wonder, like, how much of the light does he have? How much of the dark does she have? Like, what's the balance going on there? What's their relationship? Are they related? Are they just into each other? All of that stuff. And I love that it gave Kylo Ren more layers because he's just so interesting. He's so flawed and he wants so much, but he has this darkness. Maybe there's a glimmer of hope.
That was well done. Even in the last scene they had together where he goes, join me, you know, screw the Jedi, screw the Sith, screw all of this. Let's start over. You and me, let's start this over together and have a new dominion. Her response to that was great. She's like, please don't do this. Please don't be that guy. Don't be that guy. And I liked that response. I loved how you could see she was clearly debating it.
Yeah.
She was clearly pondering the possibility of joining him. Even though you knew in your heart as the audience, she's not gonna join him. But you could still see her pondering it, and it's justified why she'd be pondering it, why she'd be tempted, because what he's saying actually had a lot of merit. What he's saying actually made sense. There's a lot of points in this film where it makes you question everything. Okay, for instance, Benicio del Toro going, oh, this guy was an arms dealer. He sold to the First Order. And he also sold to the Resistance. He sold to everybody. It's basically a commentary on how war is profitable. War is profitable by the rich. And they show you the rich and how lavish they live while this disaster, while this violence is happening on the other side. They're all profiting. They're living it up in this casino.
And the mistreatment and abuse of the other people who basically do all the work for the casino.
Dobbies.
Yeah.
All the Dobbies. It was a good
really
commentary.
poignant, yeah.
So let's talk about that kiss.
Oh yeah, with Finn and Rose, right?
There's mixed feelings on that. And Skeeter watched it today with us. And he didn't like that kiss. And I could see why he didn't like it. Courtney liked it a lot. And the reason why she liked it was because it was so surprising. John Boyega's character, Finn, wasn't expecting it. So he just kind of responded like, I wasn't expecting that. And then she passes out. The thing is, and I agree with Skeeter here, she probably should have died in that scene. That would have made that stronger. It would have left a deeper mark on him that he has to deal with now because she admitted her love for him and then she's gone. Now we've got this thing where she's alive, she's gonna come back, and now there's like this, there's either a love triangle between Finn, Rey, and Rose, or between Poe, Finn, and Rey.
That kiss just kind of came out of nowhere.
That's how you're supposed to feel. It's supposed to feel like it came out of nowhere. How you felt about it is up to you, though.
It was a bold move. It's probably the first time we've seen a black guy and an Asian woman kiss on the big screen, right?
Yes. Well, as far as I can remember, this is the first time I can recall seeing a black guy kissing an Asian girl on a big screen in a giant blockbuster film. Even if you didn't like it, even if it didn't sit well with you because it didn't fit the story, for me it was just like, wow, I'm glad they did that. It was beautiful to me that they actually went there. I love the cameo with Yoda.
Yes.
The only thing I didn't like with Yoda was his very first shot. It looked a little weird to me. It looked cartoony, like they needed to do another render pass on Yoda. Overall, I thought Yoda's just presence was awesome.
Yeah.
Everything he said was poignant. And the biggest thing I took away from what he said was, failure is important.
Yes.
A lot of people fail to talk about failure and how important and helpful failure can actually be, because you learn from your mistakes more than you learn from your successes.
Exactly. It's important to embrace failure. It's a good message for kids to learn and for adults to be reminded of. There's just that desire to be perfect all the time, but you don't always learn from perfection.
Before I forget, I think Domhnall Gleeson did a great job as playing this guy who's basically getting his ass handed into him the entire film.
At first, I have to admit, I was like, oh, I feel like he's hamming it on too much. His accent was just so very heightened RP, you know, very this stiff upper lip from the 1950s.
I loved it.
Yeah, but it suited his character, and then when you kind of see him just being thrashed around and his brilliant jokes and all that, I was like, yeah.
He was just such a great punchline every time.
Yeah.
Like when he sees Kylo Ren down and he wants to kill him, he opens up his jacket to take this blaster out, and Kylo Ren wakes up and he just closes his jacket so smooth, like nothing happened. He's like, what happened here? That made me laugh. There was a lot of great funny moments in there. There was two things that bothered me. One that was hammed on a little strong, and one that was not done strong enough. Luke has Rey sit on that rock, and he goes, reach. And she goes like this, and he tickles her hand, and she goes, oh my God, I feel it. I'm like, oh my God, all right, well, it's a little funny, but it's a little much. Like it went on a little too long for me, and then he slaps her hand and then tosses the thing. It was funny. And the audience was laughing, and I get why they were laughing. It was funny.
It was cute.
But it was a little long. The other one, they established that these villagers on this island do not like Rey because she's messing shit up, right?
Mm-hmm.
She's practicing with the staff. Then she practices with the lightsaber. Then she cuts the rock in half, and the rock tumbles down, and there's these two villagers walking with a barrel full of stuff, and the rock just blows through it. And they look up at Rey. I wanted there to be this moment where Rey sees them, they see Rey, and she goes like this. She just hides behind the rock, and they just start yelling at her in their language. And they didn't do any of that. They just like looked up, and she looks at them, and then she like goes about her day. Like the movie just keeps moving, and I thought that was a lost laugh that they could have milked, and it would have been justified because they set the joke up already. The part that shocked everyone twice, because we watched it twice. The part that shocked everyone was when Laura Dern, or Vice Admiral Holdo, decides to kamikaze the ship into the First Order ships. At light speed. I remember that moment, and I waited for it for the second viewing, where it just goes quiet, and you hear everybody in the theater gasp, and just they're like, like everyone's just shocked. It was so brilliant. The sound of the film just went out.
Oh my God.
And you just see this thing, and then the movie continues, and I'm like, wow, that was one of the best moments in all the Star Wars movies.
Yeah, it was just so dramatic and made even more poignant by the lack of music.
The very last thing to talk about is just the length of the movie. This is the longest Star Wars movie to date. I think that it was justified, and I almost wish that it was a little bit longer. I wish that they did some things a little bit longer, some things a little bit less, some things a little bit longer. I think it was a bold choice to go longer. One of the things Gregory said in his review was that this felt epic, and I'm inclined to agree. When I was watching it the second time, I'm like, this is Lord of the Rings level Star Wars. It's very much space opera. It's very large, it's very grand, the music is very grand, the characters are very grand and heightened, and everything is just larger than life. The stakes are so high. Rian Johnson did a fantastic job. Whether you agree with him or not, this is a fantastic film. This was a solid movie. It very easily could have been not what it is. It could have easily been a bad movie. This isn't the same category, but like Atomic Blonde, for instance, right? When the previews came out, where everyone was just like so excited, it looks amazing, and then you get there and you're like, oh, that's what the movie is? All right.
Yeah.
Well. And I know that a lot of people felt that about this because they wanted something else, but for me, I was extremely satisfied. I don't own Force Awakens or Rogue One. I'm gonna own Last Jedi.
Oh yeah, I think for me, if I was to own any Star Wars film, which I don't, I would get this one for sure.
This along with the original trilogy. I think we covered this in depth enough, you guys. If you're even here to the end, you're awesome for hanging out with us and putting up with our annoying voices for this long. So, I love you. Thank you so much for hanging out. You guys, please check out ACHARA KIRK on the social media. Subscribe to this channel if you haven't already. Check out our other reactions, reviews, and short films. I'm Jaby Koay. This is
ACHARA KIRK.
Peace out.